There have been several cases of people discovering unusual things in their backyards, and so today's video is on the top 5 mysterious backyard discoveries. Number 5. A family from Iowa was walking through their backyard when they noticed something quite odd. At the shallow end of a creek, they saw something that looked like a bowling ball, but when they got closer, they realized that that was not the case, and they started pulling out this strange item. They ended up with a huge bone in their hands. How unusual. They later brought it to the Iowa State Archaeologist's office, and they discovered it was actually a 12,000-year-old mammoth bone, and an incredibly well-preserved one at that. Further excavation was done at the same spot where they found it, and they found many other smaller bones there as well, indicating that a mammoth died at that exact spot in their backyard. That's pretty crazy. Anyway, moving on to number 4. A man in New Orleans was digging out his backyard to fit a new swimming pool, but he ended up finding an ancient graveyard there. A total of 13 caskets were found in his backyard, stacked on top of one another. The owner found out his property actually used to be the St. Peter's Cemetery. Despite knowing the property had historic ties, this was beyond what he could have expected. Apparently, the cemetery closed a long time ago because it was too overcrowded, and people couldn't dig anywhere without hitting other graves. The graveyard moved to a new location, and wealthy families had the remains of their loved ones moved as well. But clearly that was not the case for everyone, and several graves were left behind. These kinds of events don't seem to be that much of a big deal in New Orleans though. A few years before, 36 graves were found at a spot not too far away. I guess in the past the city of New Orleans had poor grave management. Number 3. A mother in Cambridgeshire, UK, didn't believe her 9-year-old son when he came to tell her that a cheetah was in their backyard. The mother thought it was probably just a large cat at the time, or a figment of the child's imagination. But then she looked out of her kitchen window and got greeted by the sight of a 6-foot-long cheetah attacking her son's bicycle. Luckily, her son had immediately fled after he spotted the animal, before the cheetah started ripping the boy's bicycle to shreds, biting chunks out of its saddle and destroying the tires with its claws. Apparently, the cheetah was quite well known in the area. Named Akia, the cheetah had previously escaped from an animal sanctuary. The zoo staff said it managed to escape because of faulty electrical fencing. Police and zookeepers later arrived at their house, and they certainly had their work cut out for them, as the cheetah fought fiercely against anyone who tried to catch it. But they eventually got the situation under control. The boy may not have been in too much danger, however. An animal psychologist points out that tame cheetahs are not as dangerous as it might be presumed, since they are quite tame and therefore aren't necessarily a huge threat to people. But of course, a hungry animal is a much different situation. But luckily, it seems like this cheetah got a full meal before it escaped. That's pretty lucky. Number 2. A couple was walking their dog on their property in Gold Country, California, when they noticed the top of an old canister poking out of the ground. They brought the canister to their house, opened it, and were surprised to see a bunch of discs covered with dirt. After a little brushes, they were stunned to discover that the discs were actually gold coins from the late 19th century. They returned to the spot where they found the old canister and discovered 7 more canisters just like it. They ended up finding 1,427 coins in total. Their face value was around $28,000, but after taking them to be restored and valued, it turned out that they were actually worth $10 million. The coins were worth a lot more than the gold inside them, since they were quite rare. In fact, one of the biggest coin assessment firms in the world stated that 13 of the coins were the best preserved of this type in the world. But how did these coins get there? Both the family and their attorneys researched in hopes of finding some clues to this question, but nothing came out of it. The best guess they had was that someone involved in the mining industry buried them gradually, and over time they stacked up a huge amount. This is something that gold miners did in the gold rush to try to protect their wealth, so it's certainly a plausible theory. And finally, number 1. A family had just moved into their new house in the West Athens section of Los Angeles when their 2 boys stumbled upon something strange while playing in the backyard. They were digging around the backyard, and at one spot just below the surface, they struck something that felt like a roof of a car. They called the police, and soon afterwards, a 1974 Ferrari Dino 246 GTS was dug out. The car was not only preserved in one piece, but it was in surprisingly good condition given the circumstances. Whoever buried it tried to preserve it as much as possible. In fact, the original owner of the car tried to mummify it with plastic sheets and stuffed towels. Whoever buried it must have planned for someone to someday find it, sort of like a time capsule. The family and the authorities researched the car as much as possible, but no one could figure out who the original owner was and how on earth the car got there. They asked several neighbors if they ever observed something unusual happening, but no one could recollect seeing any digging activity. Several months passed before the police figured out that the car was on their stolen list. The car was originally purchased from an LA Ferrari dealership called the Hollywood Sports Cars, famous for its celebrity clients like Frank Sinatra. The police eventually traced it back to its owner, where we learn much more information. The owner had actually bought the car for his wife as a birthday gift, but the car was stolen after they left it outside of a restaurant. They reported it stolen at the time, but police never discovered who the thief was. So I guess the thief buried the car here to hide it. Perhaps he had a lot of police attention at the time. The couple who discovered the car in their backyard eventually put it up for auction and sold it to a young mechanic who ended up completely restoring it to its original condition. Thanks to him, the car has survived to this day. Before we close out today's video, we have just a couple honorable mentions that didn't make the list. A man in Silver Lake was attempting to install solar panels at his home when he stumbled upon a vault hidden underneath his backyard hot tub. He managed to get the vault open and was greeted by the sight of thousands of dense marijuana buds packed into glass jars, completely vacuum sealed and preserved. Apparently, the marijuana was worth $175,000 and had been left there for God knows how long. The man first considered keeping and selling the drugs, but in the end he decided that was a bad idea, as marijuana was illegal at the time. He called the police, who promptly confiscated everything, but I don't think they ever found out who put it there. And here's just one more. A family in Wisconsin found an entrance to a Cold War bunker in their backyard. They assumed it was just an empty space and left it be, and over the next decade, thick bushes and vegetation completely covered it over. But then curiosity got the better of them, and they decided to open the heavy steel hatch. When they climbed down, they found quite a large room down there. The room was in a pretty rundown state. 5 feet of water had accumulated, and they saw US Army boxes that were floating around everywhere. When they opened them, they realized that they contained enough supplies for a family to survive for 2 weeks underground. There was food, clothing, medical supplies, tools, flashlights, and batteries. It turns out that the previous owner had actually built the bunker to protect his family from a possible nuclear attack. During the Cold War, the threat of a nuclear attack was very real. All of the items they found down there that wasn't flooded was actually pretty well preserved, since the container was airtight. The family decided to donate the surviving supplies to a museum, and they were later featured at a Cold War exhibit. Apparently, the bunker was built in 1960, just 2 years before building bunkers became popular in America. But anyways, I hope you enjoyed today's video. Be sure to subscribe for more and check out some of my previous uploads.